like a buttercup. You're a Barbie doll. Show them all what I'm made of. Strut down the hall. Won't stop till I get enough.
Wow, so this New Orleans attack on New Year's Day really, I mean, even I was kind of surprised by some of the details in the CBS News report.
Yeah.
It's not just like the horror of what happened on Bourbon Street, but also all these questions it brings up, about security and how prepared we are for this kind of thing.
Yeah, what struck me right away was just how this attack, kind of weaponized a moment of celebration, right? New Year's Day, a time for new beginnings, and then it turns into this just scene of carnage.
Right.
And that deliberate targeting of joy, I think, really adds another layer to the whole.
Yeah, it really does.
Yeah.
The report kind of walks us through how it all unfolded, right? You have this pickup truck driven by 42-year-old Shamsuddin Jamar.
Okay.
And he bypassed barricades and just plowed right into those crowds on the sidewalk.
Oh, wow.
Witnesses are describing it as absolute chaos.
I bet.
With people, running for their lives, just total chaos.
Yeah, and the article points out that he didn't just, drive into the crowd randomly. He was very intentional about it, like weaving through people to cause as much damage as possible. It's just chilling to think about the level of planning that went into this.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we learned that Jabbar was a U.S. citizen from Texas, and he had rented this truck just the day before in Houston.
Okay.
And then drove it to New Orleans. But what's even more disturbing is that this wasn't just a hit and run.
Right.
He was armed, he was wearing body armor, and they found a black ISIS flag on his truck.
Wow. See, that flag, that's a huge red flag. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It immediately raises the question of motive.
Right.
And whether this was like a lone wolf situation or something more organized.
Yeah, especially since the FBI found IEDs, those improvised explosive devices.
Right.
Not just in the truck itself, but planted around the French Quarter, too.
Oh, wow.
That points to a whole other level of planning and maybe even accomplices, which is really frightening.
It really is. It's fascinating how the presence of those multiple IEDs just changes everything, It takes a different skill set and resources compared to using a single device.
Right.
It suggests that maybe this guy Jabbar had some training in explosives or was part of a network that supplied them.
So this isn't just a disturbed individual. We're talking about someone with possible connections to a larger organization.
Exactly.
And the FBI has confirmed that they are treating this as an act of terrorism.
Yeah.
And are actively investigating any possible links to ISIS.
It's interesting how the article includes those official reactions to the attack. You can really feel the gravity of the situation in their words.
I know.
Governor Landry calls it, quote, horrific act of violence.
Right.
And then the New Orleans coroner, he talks about how difficult it's going to be to even identify the victims because of the extent of their injuries. It's just awful. And the city's police superintendent, Ann Kirkpatrick, she gives this chilling insight into Jabbar's mindset, describing him as, quote, hell-bent on creating carnage.
Ah, that's powerful stuff. The article doesn't just stick to the official statements, though. They also interviewed a couple, Jim and Nicole Moore from Iowa, who were caught right in the middle of it all.
Right. Oh, gosh.
It really brings home the human cost of this whole tragedy,
Yeah. Those eyewitness accounts are so important because they remind us that behind all the statistics and the official reports, there are real people whose lives are forever changed by something like this.
Absolutely.
Oh.
So the mowers were just enjoying the New Year's Day festivities when they heard this loud crash.
Oh, no.
And they saw the truck smashing through a barricade and speeding towards the crowd.
Her.
And then came the gunfire.
Oh, my gosh.
They said it was like something out of a nightmare.
It's hard to even imagine. And the fact that it happened on Bourbon Street, such a vibrant and iconic place,
Right.
just adds to the shock and the sense of violation.
Right. It's a place associated with celebration and joy.
Yeah.
And now it's forever marked by this horrific event.
Yeah.
And once the gunfire stopped, they tried to help those who were hit.
Of course.
But tragically, many had already died from the impact.
Oh, that's awful.
It's just such a stark reminder of how fragile life is.
Right, and how quickly things can change.
Exactly. Now, here's something I found particularly interesting. The article mentions a 2017 memo from the city itself.
Okay.
Apparently, New Orleans had already identified the French Quarter as a potential target for a vehicle attack.
You're kidding. They knew this was a possibility.
Yeah, they even outlined specific security measures in that memo.
Like what?
Like enhanced pedestrian bollards, those concrete barriers that are supposed to stop vehicles.
Okay, so they knew the risk, but obviously those bollards didn't stop this guy.
Right. It makes you wonder if those measures were even put in place, and if they were, why didn't they work?
That's the big question. Were there gaps in their security plan? Could this attack have been prevented? I think we need to take a closer look at that 2017 memo and see what it reveals.
Yeah, we've laid out the basic facts of the case, but as you said, there's still so much to unpack.
Absolutely.
We need to dig deeper into Shamsuddin Jabbar, his motivations, his potential ties to ISIS, and how this attack fits into the bigger picture of terrorism.
I agree. And a key part of that will be analyzing that 2017 memo and understanding how the city responded to the threat of a vehicle attack after they identified it.
Exactly.
So picking up where we left off, let's try to understand what might have led Shamsuddin Jabbar to do something as horrific as this.
Right. We know he was a U.S. citizen from Texas with military experience.
Mm-hmm.
The CBS article didn't really go into detail about his service record, but it makes me wonder what kind of training might be relevant in a case like this.
That's a really good question. Military training, can cover a wide range of skills, and some of them could unfortunately be applied to an attack like this.
Right.
It all depends on his role and specialization, but he could have received training in weapons handling, explosives, combat tactics, or even intelligence gathering.
So those skills that are meant to protect our country could potentially be turned against us. That's a scary thought.
It is, and it highlights the challenge of identifying and stopping potential threats from within our own ranks. There's always that risk that someone with military training could become radicalized or decide to use their skills for bad.
You mentioned earlier the black ISIS flag they found on Jabbar's truck. It seems like a pretty clear message, but what can we actually take away from that? Is it just a way to spread fear, or could it mean a deeper connection to the terrorist organization?
Using the ISIS flag is definitely intentional, and it serves multiple purposes. On a symbolic level, it's meant to instill fear and project an image of strength and reach. It's all about creating the impression that ISIS is behind this, even if the actual connection is weak.
So it's basically psychological warfare.
Exactly. It's about spreading their message and creating a climate of fear that goes way beyond the attack itself.
But could the flag also point to a more direct link to ISIS? Could Jabbar have been trained or supported by them?
That's definitely a possibility that the FBI will be looking into. They'll be checking any communication records, travel history, or financial transactions that might connect him to ISIS or any other extremist groups.
The article also mentioned the possibility of accomplices, especially with those multiple IEDs they found in and around the French Quarter. What would make investigators think that Jabbar wasn't working alone?
Well, the complexity of using multiple IEDs, especially in a coordinated attack, usually means a level of expertise and support that's hard for one person to pull off. There's a good chance Jabbar had help getting the materials, putting the devices together, or even planning and carrying out the attack.
What about the fire at that Airbnb he rented before the attack? Could that be connected to the idea of accomplices?
Absolutely. It could have been an attempt to get rid of evidence, or maybe the place was used as a meeting spot or a staging area for the attack. The FBI will be carefully going over any evidence they got from the fire to see if it tells them anything about Jabbar's movements or any potential collaborators.
It seems like every new detail just leads to more questions. But going back to that 2017 memo we talked about earlier, I think that's a really important piece of the puzzle.
I agree. The fact that New Orleans had already identified the French Quarter as a possible target for a vehicle attack is crucial to understanding how this all happened.
You mentioned the memo outlined some specific security measures like those concrete bollards. Do you know if they actually installed them?
That's what I want to know. If they were installed, why didn't they stop Jabbar from driving onto the sidewalk? Were there gaps in how they were placed? Were they not maintained properly? Or did he find a way to get around them completely?
It's even more unsettling knowing that they knew about the risk, but still couldn't stop this from happening. What kind of information would you look for in that 2017 memo to help put all the pieces together?
I'd be interested in the details about those security measures they proposed, their timeline for implementing them, and any cost-benefit analyses they might have done. I'd also want to know if there were any dissenting opinions or warnings about how effective those measures would be.
And I imagine you'd want to see if there were any follow-up assessments or updates to the security plan since 2017, right?
Absolutely. The threat landscape is always changing, and security measures need to keep up. The question is, did New Orleans stay ahead of those changes, or did they become complacent?
The CBS article also mentioned how the attack impacted the city, especially the postponement of the Sugar Bowl. It seems small compared to the loss of life, but it shows how this event disrupted everything in New Orleans.
The postponement wasn't just about the game itself. It was about the safety of all those fans who would be gathering in the Superdome. The city had to make sure there were no other threats and that people felt safe enough to go.
Which must have been really tough under the circumstances.
Definitely. And it shows how far-reaching the effects of terrorism are. It's not just about the immediate attack, but also the fear and uncertainty it leaves behind, the disruption to daily life and the economic consequences.
And beyond all the practical stuff, there's the emotional impact on the city.
You're right. New Orleans is known for its resilience and its ability to overcome tough times. But this attack really hits at the core of the city's spirit.
We've really gone deep into the details of this attack and looked at some of the broader implications.
Yeah.
But I think there's another layer we need to talk about, the human element. We heard from the mowers, who saw the attack firsthand. But what about the lasting trauma for the survivors and those who lost loved ones?
That's such an important point. The psychological scars of something like this can be really deep. Survivors might struggle with PTSD, anxiety, and depression, and families of the victims will have to deal with unimaginable grief and loss.
It's hard to even grasp the pain and suffering this attack has caused, both directly and indirectly.
And we can't forget that the healing process will be long and complicated.
So what can we do to help those who've been affected by this?
It's crucial to provide access to mental health resources. Things like counseling therapy and support groups can help survivors process their trauma and begin to heal.
And what about the city as a whole? How does New Orleans recover from something like this?
It's going to take a collective effort. Community leaders, law enforcement, mental health professionals, and ordinary citizens all need to work together to rebuild trust, foster resilience, and create a sense of safety and security.
It's a huge task, but I believe in the strength and spirit of New Orleans.
Me too. And I think it's important to remember that even in the midst of such a terrible event, there are stories of courage, compassion, and resilience coming out of this tragedy.
Like those who ran to help the injured, those who comforted strangers, and those who stood together in defiance of fear.
Exactly. Those acts of kindness and solidarity remind us that even when faced with such horrific violence, the human spirit can overcome it.
As we head into the last part of this deep dive, I'm curious to explore what lessons we can learn from all of this. How can we prevent something like this from happening again?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
You know, it feels like we've just been going over and over this horrific attack in New Orleans, trying to make sense of something that just doesn't make sense.
Right.
But as we get to the end of our deep dive here, I think we need to shift from like the what to the how. Like, how do we move forward? How do we prevent this from happening again?
That's the real challenge, right? Preventing these kinds of attacks, especially by individuals who just blend in, it's incredibly hard. There's no easy answer, no magic solution that'll guarantee safety.
But we have to start somewhere.
Yeah.
What can cities do to protect themselves? Especially in places like Bourbon Street that are always packed with tourists.
Well, that 2017 memo from New Orleans gives us a place to start. Even though the attack still happened, the city was aware of the threat of a vehicle attack, so their proposed measures, things like bollards and more surveillance, they weren't enough this time.
Right.
But they at least give us a framework for planning ahead.
So maybe it's not about coming up with totally new strategies, but about really looking at the plans we have and making sure they're up to date and that we're actually putting them into practice.
Exactly. Security plans can't be static. They need to be constantly evolving to address new threats and weaknesses. And that's where looking back, even though it's painful, can help us. Analyzing what went wrong in New Orleans can help other cities make better plans.
We've talked a lot about bollards. They seem to be a pretty standard security measure, but obviously not foolproof. Joe Barr got past them somehow. Is there any way to make them more effective, or are we just accepting a certain level of risk when we're in public spaces?
Bollards are meant to deter, not to create an impenetrable barrier. How well they work really depends on where they're placed, how they're designed, and how well they fit into the environment.
Right.
We want them strong enough to stop a vehicle, but we don't want to turn a lively street into a fortress. It's a tough balance.
So we're back to that constant struggle between security and freedom, that desire to keep our cities open and welcoming.
Exactly. And that's where technology could play a bigger role, I think. Things like advances in surveillance, facial recognition, and even AI could help us identify potential threats before they happen. But those technologies also bring up ethical questions and privacy concerns.
It's never straightforward, is it? But besides the physical measures, what about addressing the reasons why extremism happens in the first place? It seems like that's essential for long-term solutions.
Absolutely. Countering extremist ideologies is a complex, multifaceted issue. It involves education, promoting critical thinking skills, encouraging dialogue between different faiths, and tackling things like social isolation and economic inequality, which can make people more susceptible to radicalization.
So it's not just about catching the bad guys. It's about stopping people from becoming bad guys to begin with.
You got it. And
Yeah.
that requires a long-term societal commitment to creating a world where people feel valued, connected, and hopeful about the future.
This deep dive has been informative, eye-opening, and honestly at times really tough to process. We've covered the attack itself, the investigation, the security failures, and the broader fight against terrorism. But I keep thinking about the victims, their families, the people of New Orleans who are trying to rebuild their lives. What message of hope or resilience can we offer them in the face of such a tragedy?
You know, what stands out to me, even amidst the darkness of this event, is how resilient the human spirit is. We see it in the first responders who rushed into danger, in the everyday people who helped and comforted others, and in the community leaders who are guiding the city through this incredibly difficult time.
It reminds us that even when faced with hate and violence, there's still so much good in the world.
And that's what we need to hold on to. We need to nurture that goodness, to make those acts of kindness louder, and to stand together against those who want to tear us apart.
This deep dive has given us a lot to think about, and I know we still have many questions. But the most important thing to remember is that we can't let fear control us. We need to stay informed, be aware, and support each other. And we need to keep having these tough conversations so we can learn from this tragedy and work together to create a safer, more just, and more compassionate world.
Well said. And remember, knowledge is power. The more we understand about the things that shape our world, the better prepared we are to deal with them and make a positive difference.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We'll keep following this story as it develops and let you know of any updates. Until then, stay safe and stay informed.
Sound the alarm. I'm coming up. We'll have a ball. I'm sweet like a buttercup. You're Barbie doll. Show them all what I'm made of. Strut down the hall. Won't stop till I get enough.